All right, the Iliad and the Odyssey, although this today will just be the Iliad, part one. Homer was the most famous poet in the whole of ancient Greece, but he was a mysterious man too. For centuries, scholars have had no idea exactly when he lived or where he was from. They can't even agree on whether he actually existed at all. Despite the lingering questions, historians traditionally credit Homer with writing two great epic poems from ancient Greece, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is 24 books and 16,000 lines. It's a long poem. It describes vividly the final days of the Trojan War and introduces a character called Odysseus. The Odyssey has 24 books as well, but it's shorter with only 11,300 lines. The Odyssey is like a sequel to the Iliad, for it centers on Odysseus and his struggle to get home after the Trojan War. Here's a brief account of the Iliad. A long, long time ago, in a kingdom far, far away, there was a girl named Helen who lived in Greece. From a young age, her looks had been the talk of the town. No matter where she went, people always turned their heads to admire her. They all agreed that she was the prettiest girl in the world. Every young man, both in and out of Greece, dreamed of marrying her. One by one, they came to declare their love. As the competition grew fierce, Helen's father began to consider the suitors carefully. At last, he settled on Menelaus. Menelaus was king of Sparta. His brother Agamemnon was king of Mycenae, and he was the most powerful ruler in Greece. We have a theatrical photo from the movie Troy of Agamemnon and Menelaus. Helen's father knew that this pick would break many hearts. To avoid troubles, he made all of Helen's admirers swear an oath. He made them promise that they'd never take Helen away from Menelaus. If any of them did, the others would unite to get her back. At the time, this seemed marvelous. Helen and Menelaus got married without a hitch. Everyone else moved on with his own life. For a while, there was no snag. Soon, many of Helen's former suitors, such as Odysseus, forgot all about the vow. Years later, Odysseus became king of Ithaca. He married Penelope. The two had a son named Telemachus, and they were very happy. Here is our Odysseus. Though Odysseus was able to put Helen out of his mind, Paris, a Trojan prince from Troy, was having a hard time with it. One day, a great opportunity arose. On that fateful day, three goddesses, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Hera, the goddess of gods and goddesses, came to see Paris. They had only one question for him: who among them was the most beautiful? Paris looked at all of them and was torn. He didn't want to upset any deity, any god. Yet, when Aphrodite promised him the hand of Helen as his wife, the choice became clear. Right away, Paris declared that Aphrodite was the prettiest. The beaming goddess then used her power to make Helen fall in love with Paris. The two eloped and stole Menelaus' treasure. For several years, nobody knew where Helen and Paris had gone. Then all of a sudden, they resurfaced and went back to Troy, Paris's home country. When word reached Menelaus, he asked all the former suitors of Helen's to honor the oath. Odysseus was, of course, on that roll call. He tried to avoid going, but he couldn't break his promise. So with a heavy heart, he bid his son and his wife goodbye to join Menelaus in Aulis. Upon his arrival, he saw that a great number of heroes had already turned up. They were busy preparing for battle. Shortly after Odysseus docked his ships, he and the others met and exchanged pleasantries. How you doing? Good, how have you been? Then they got down to business. Agamemnon would be the leader of the military campaign. And Nestor, an ailing king from Pylos, would be his advisor. Once the plans were drawn up and the sacrifices were offered to the gods, they took sail and made their way to Troy. Here's a picture of them arriving in Troy. Not at all obvious. The Trojans saw the Greeks coming. They tried to block the invaders from making landfall, but outnumbered, they couldn't fend them off forever. It's all of the Greek city-states against one Greek city-state. At last, they gave up and retreated behind the safety of their city wall. The Trojans had lost the first round of fights. Seeking to avoid further bloodshed, the Greeks wanted to make a truce. So they sent Odysseus, Menelaus, and according to some, Acamas, to reason with the Trojans. Their demand was fair. They wanted Helen and the stolen treasure back. As convincing as their arguments were, the Trojans refused to give in. They were very angry from the previous defeat. They shouted loudly at the visitors. As the situation turned dire, the 3 Greek ambassadors left in haste. The Trojans' stubbornness left the Greeks with no choice. Now they would hold nothing back. They would launch an all-out assault on the city. They would not leave Troy until they recovered Helen and the stolen treasure. The Greeks thought it would be easy to capture Troy, but they were wrong. As the battle dragged on, from months to years to 9 years, the Greeks finally came to realize that they would never take Troy by storm. To make matters worse, a plague had broke out in their camps. The illness killed many Greek soldiers and could strike down a lot more. All the Greeks knew the cause of the plague, or they thought they did. They put the blame squarely on Agamemnon. He defied the mighty god Apollo and kept his priest's daughter as a war prize. Troy was the place where the temple of Apollo was, and so he took the priest's daughter from there and kept her. His selfishness took a heavy toll on his force. When the death toll continued to rise and Agamemnon showed no signs of giving in, Achilles, their hero, lashed out at his leader. He accused him of disaster. Furious, Agamemnon snapped. He said he'd give up Chryses, the girl, if Achilles would replace her with Achilles' own favorite slave girl, Briseis. Achilles was very upset, but he eventually came around and agreed to hand over Briseis. He told Agamemnon that he was through with the war. He predicted that Agamemnon would one day see the value of losing him as a great warrior. With those parting words, Achilles turned and walked out of the Greeks' camps. So here we have a picture of Brad Pitt as Achilles from Troy. Later, Achilles recounted with who but his mother, a sea nymph and a goddess by the name of Thetis. Thetis felt sorry for her son. She went up to Mount Olympus and laid out her case to Zeus, the king of all gods and goddesses. Upon hearing the story, Zeus felt very sorry for Achilles too. He promised Thetis that he would take matters into his own hands and give Achilles justice. That night, Zeus fixed a false dream and had it delivered to Agamemnon. The following morning, Agamemnon told his generals to prepare for an all-out attack on the Trojans. He boasted the long-awaited victory would come today because he dreamt of it the night before. Assured by the vision, the Greeks committed their entire force to this one battle. But the Trojans were undeterred because Achilles was nowhere to be found. For the first time in 9 years, the Trojans dared challenge their enemies out in the open. As the two sides fought against each other fiercely, Paris found himself standing face to face with Menelaus. They're the two people who are really fighting here, right? Though terrified by this encounter, because Paris isn't so much of a warrior as Menelaus is, but he found he could not back away. So he offered a duel with Menelaus. The winner, they need terms, the winner would get to keep Helen and the stolen treasure. Menelaus agreed. Suddenly, the battle stopped. The focus was now on the impending match. Paris took his time to launch his first strike, but he missed. Then it was Menelaus' turn. Menelaus may not have been as dashing as Paris, but he was certainly a far better warrior. As a result, he quickly outflanked Paris and began to drag him toward the other Greeks. He thought he had victory in hand, but suddenly Aphrodite, the goddess, appeared and cut Paris loose. Her action was the last straw for Athena and Hera. Both goddesses were still quite upset about losing that beauty contest. So they weighed in and helped the Greeks. Now the Trojan War became a dispute not only among mortals, but also among the immortals, the gods. On the Greek side, they had Athena, Hera, and Poseidon, the god of oceans, earthquakes, and horses. On the Trojan side, they had Apollo, who is, as we know, the god of Troy. He's got the god of music, poetry, and archery, which is helpful. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Ares, the god of war. Zeus tried to stay neutral, but he found the task increasingly difficult. As the strife intensified, the Greeks started to lose ground. When Patroclus, Achilles' good friend, learned of this, he urged his mighty hero to recant his words. He's like, please come back and fight with us. Achilles refused flat out, but he eventually loaned Patroclus his army. At least I'll keep you safe. Here's a picture of Patroclus from the movie Troy. Patroclus stormed into battle. Because of his mail, his armor, the Trojans thought that Achilles had returned. Whoops. They were terrified, so they began to flee. Patroclus, thinking he was very scary looking all of a sudden, chased after them all the way to Troy's city wall. When he tried to scale it, Apollo struck him down again and again. Finally, at the last blow, Achilles' armor fell apart and revealed the attacker's true identity. Hector, Paris's older brother, who was set to take the throne after his father died and be the next king of Troy, who was a great Trojan hero, saw what was happening. He forced his way through the thickening crowd and finished off Patroclus. When Achilles heard of his friend's death, he was furious. He went to see Agamemnon, and the two struck up a deal. Agamemnon would compensate Achilles for his loss and let him be the new leader. So he would run the military. In return, Achilles would forgive Agamemnon and stay on to fight the Greeks. Upon assuming the position as commander-in-chief, Achilles made vengeance his first priority. In no time, he got his wish and slew the man who killed Patroclus, Hector. But even this retaliation couldn't vent his anger. So he tied Hector's body behind his chariot and dragged him around for days. The Trojans were devastated, and the person who suffered the most was Hector's father, King Priam. To get his son back, he loaded a cart full of treasure and went to see Achilles. He poured his heart out to the young lad and begged him to let him take back Hector's body. Achilles felt sorry for King Priam. Before releasing the corpse, he ordered the maids wash and clothe the fallen hero. After that was done, King Priam brought his son back to Troy and gave him a fitting funeral. And then once the funeral was over, which was a long time, I think it was like 100 days, then the war resumed. And now it's time to answer the questions.